Welcome to Issues That Matter. I'm Cynthia Pooler. My guest today is Charlotte Dennett, and Charlotte has written a book called Follow the Pipelines, and it's about the the issue of oil in the conflicts that are happening today. So, Charlotte, how have you been?
Um, Looking forward to spring. That's how I've been.
Right, right. So, all of the stuff that's going on, you you relate back to the fight for oil?
Yes.
Okay. Can you elaborate the Ukrainian situation a little bit and then get into the Gaza situation a little bit? Because those are the two hot spots right now.
Right. Well, yeah, I take what's called a geopolitical analysis, uh, which leaders always do. They have to. They want to know what what their in where their interests are, the natural resources, and so on. Um, although most American media does not do that so much, although it's catching up a little bit. So my book, the full title of my book is Follow the Pipelines, Uncovering the Mystery of a Lost Spy and the Deadly Politics of the Great Game for Oil. And so my following pipelines, my own following pipelines, stems from my looking into my father's death. He was America's first master spy in the Middle East, and his last mission was to Saudi Arabia. And the purpose of it was to determine the route in Trans-Arabian pipeline, which was very big post-war deal. The United States had an exclusive concession of Saudi oil, and so what I learned uh, from reading my father's last report, uh, he was head of counterintelligence for the United States. His father report showed all the intrigue going behind this pipeline. The Russians, the Syrians didn't want the pipeline to run across the Saudi desert into Palestine. And I have lots of maps in my book, which really helps you to understand. It's going to hold up uh, because it shows that. Now, I can't tell. Well,
Yeah,
anyway, there's a
showing
map
the map.
on the cover of the book, and
Yep.
what it shows is pipelines carrying oil from Iraq and Saudi Arabia to a terminal on the Eastern Mediterranean. And what's the Eastern Mediterranean? It's Palestine time, and it's Lebanon, Syria. These are the countries that border the Eastern Mediterranean and have been terminal points for major pipelines. And so anyway, and I'll get to Ukraine shortly. Anyway, so I looked at my father's report, saw that the problem with Syrians weren't cooperating. And eventually you had the first coup, the first CIA coup. It was not in Iran, it's in Syria, 1949, and it replaced the elected government and with army uh, an army chief and put him in power because he approved the pipeline terminating Kaifel. Ultimately, it did not, but it terminated in southern Lebanon. But here's the point. I started researching the New York Times, and I found this fantastic article. It was March 2, 1947, and its title was Pipeline for U.S. Adds to Middle East Issues. And then underneath that, oil concessions raised questions involving the position of Russia. All right, so we're talking here 1940. So this is the beginning of the whole. And this, just by virtue of this pipeline being planned, the article goes into, well, who wants this pipeline and who doesn't want this pipeline? And it even gets into some of the rivalry because the British and the French weren't happy about it. The Russians weren't happy about it. They saw Saudi oil as elevating the United States to a major power. And they already had designs on the region. So another very important point in this article was the protection, the military and economic protection of this pipeline is crucial. I mean, if you're gonna take oil out of the soil and you're gonna send it to market, how do you do it? The most efficient way is through pipelines. But if you're gonna run a pipeline, you gotta make sure that it won't be a victim of sabotage, that it won't go through an area of conflict. And the reason for that is no bank will support this major infrastructure if there's turmoil in the region. So once I learned those lessons, I began to study some of the endless wars that we've had in the 21st century, and I discovered they're all related to war, and and I illustrate this with abundance of maps. But now let's go into, if we want to go into Ukraine, uh, Ukraine turns out to have the largest amounts of oil and natural gas in Europe, next to Russia, if you want to. Oh, there's Scott. He's there.
Mhm.
Yay.
Hello,
Hey,
sorry,
Scott. Hi.
my,
Okay.
my day I was behind the 8 ball, so
It's
I'm playing
okay.
catch up.
Okay. Well, Cynthia, shall I just continue and then
Yeah,
I'll.
yeah,
Alright.
talk about,
All right, what Scott, what I was explaining is that by by researching what was behind the death of my master spy father after his last mission to Saudi Arabia, I learned that the Trans-Arabian pipeline was a major issue back then. It was being built by the Americans, and the US had an exclusive concession in Saudi Arabia that elevated it to becoming a major power, not only in the Middle East, but in the world. And once I studied the industry, I began to apply some of the lessons that I learned about how vital it is if you're going to build a pipeline, you've got to protect it militarily. And I found this terrific article in the New York Times, came out 2 weeks before my father's death. And it says pipeline per US adds to Middle East issues. Oil concessions raise questions involving position of Russia. So that's what I realized. This is the beginning of the Cold War. And my father had written in his analysis of what he was doing as head of counterintelligence, he had written that there was going to be, quote, a real free for all for the oil after World War II, which there was. And anyway, so then we go up, and I was going to go up to Ukraine and what the situation is there. And I was just explaining that Ukraine has the largest amounts of oil and natural gas in Europe, and if you don't count Russia, and the largest deposits are in the eastern region, which is where all the fighting is going. And one other thing, and then I'll turn it over to you, Scott. One other thing that I discovered was a RAND report, which had come out in 2000. And at this time, everyone was looking at how are we going to get oil and natural gas out of the Caspian Sea and what risk could befall. And it's really looking into the whole issue of what's the safest route for this pipeline if it's going to carry Caspian oil and gas to Europe. And so here's the title. I highly recommend it. The title is Ukraine and Caspian, an opportunity for the United States. And the subtitle, Caspian oil, the US. Right? So you find out that the researchers here are totally conscious of the fact that that if they do anything that hinges on Russians believing in sovereignty of its own, And if they're gonna start poking around in Ukraine and looking for pipelines, this is probably gonna anger the Russians. I mean, they knew it would. And this article actually proposes building a pipeline that's going to go through Ukraine, but it's going to bypass all the Russian-owned pipelines that run through Ukraine. It's a massive web, and I've got a picture of it in the article that I sent about the other energy sources. At any rate, let me just show you a map that shows that Ukraine is completely crisscrossed by pipelines. Well, I don't have it right now, but I will. Anyway, so when we think about what's in the United States, it's a pipeline map, right? This is just a crisscross pipelines that are running through Ukraine and providing oil and natural gas to Europe. The Russian owned pipelines, but the Americans are constantly doing the bypass train, trying to find another way to get that oil and natural gas that doesn't rely on Russia. Because Russia, at the time of the invasion, was supplying 40% of the oil and natural gas to Europe. And along comes the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. It's through the Baltic Sea to a Nord Stream 1 pipeline. The U.S. was freaking out about how this pipeline was going to come into operation during the summer of 2022. And this could be a way to stop it. And China actually comes out and says, we're not going to allow this pipeline to go through. So when Russia invaded, one of the first things it was the first sanction that the U.S. did, and that was to stop the pipeline, convince Germany not to make it operational. So that's still the situation in the Ukraine. I would take it from there. The other thing that I've read is that right before the invasion, this whole eastern region was being bombarded by Ukrainian troops. These were what they considered separatist regions. I think the Russians considered them new sort of republics. They had voted, they wanted to go with Russia. They had primarily Russian speaking people. Anyway, they were being attacked. There was a civil war that preceded the invasion. And it was just like days before the Russians invaded, there were these massive attacks on Russian speaking people in Ukraine. So I think that what I argue is that context has to be understood if you're going to accurately cover and explain the war in Ukraine. And now, interestingly, what happens after the death of Navalny? Biden's come out with all sorts of sanctions. His role, and this has been stated quite frank, the U.S. objective ultimately is to weaken who've been overthrown. And I really haven't taken sides on this. I wouldn't like to live under Russian president. I'd rather be living in this country. Some people think that it's a setup. I don't know what you think about that, Scott. Be interested to know if you have any opinion on that. They'll have a hard time trying, those who support Russia, I think, have a hard time saying that, somebody snuck in there and it wasn't the Russians that killed it. Can't look at the after effects. Who benefited? And the article points out the big time that was major meetings in Munich of the European nations. So it's sort of empowered to say that we've got to support Ukraine more militarily, and now we're gonna do sanctions, and he was issuing sanctions on all sorts of Russian companies, and, you know, it looked like Ukraine was losing the war. Now suddenly, here comes the United States making a big thing about it. Uh, I never, I never accepted the argument that the Russians sabotaged their own pipeline. I mean, it defied logic, and there's no evidence that, that it wasn't the Russians that sabotaged that pipeline. But by the same, uh, aspect, I think it'll be hard to have an explanation that Navalny was killed by pro-Western people. But I'm keeping it open mind. So then I will turn it over to you, Scott, and love to hear your comments.
Well, what aspect do you want me to comment on?
I don't know. You just came back from Russia. First of all, you have made a trip from Russia to Russia, and you're doing a movie. So
Well, let me start by saying this, that Alexei Navalny doesn't register at all in Russia. He's a nobody. He's a nothing. So he exists only in the minds of the West. Vladimir Putin.
Wait, let me interrupt you there. How can you say that when I mean, all the TV media is showing these massive outpourings of love for this man. I mean, big demonstrations.
Literally, they're not. Literally, they're not showing massive support of love. Russia's a nation of, 140 million people. What's the largest demonstration you've seen in Russia?
What's the largest one I've seen? I would think it would be around that, actually.
Say again?
About his death. I
Yeah.
mean, also, I mean, I've heard, there's a lot of repression in Russia. The critics have been in jail, and Russia has a history of assassinating its critics. So I think there's a propaganda battle that Russia will have to win on this one.
Russia's already won it. It's over.
Right.
Navalny's dead. It doesn't matter. They don't care. No one in Russia is losing sleep over Navalny. There might be a couple dozen people that come out. When you talk about 100 people being arrested across the entire nation, do you understand how insignificant that is? It's a nothing burger.
All I can tell you is what I see on television.
Right, but I'm just what I'm telling you is that the Navalny supporters that existed prior to the invasion fled. 200,000 of them fled. They ran away. It was a concerted effort by Navalny supporters to create the impression of Russians fleeing Russia. The Russians that stayed were happy to see them go. Navalny was never going to be able to generate more than 5% support at a national election, ever. He's a nothing burger. Literally, there's nothing there. He's a CIA-controlled asset. When you say that Russia has imprisoned its critics, why don't you say it accurately? Russia has imprisoned people who were taking CIA money to undermine. That's what we do in America. We don't say that people imprison the critics of Joe Biden. We say we imprison people who spied on America, who took Russian money to undermine America. That's the accurate way of saying it. The thing is, there are critics in Russia. You know that when Putin wins elections in Russia, even now, he'll win an election, he'll win 60% of the vote. What's that tell you about the other 40%? I mean, if this is a dictatorship that suppresses criticism, why is there 40% of the people voting against Vladimir Putin? How in God's name could that happen? Because there is an opposition in Russia, a legitimate opposition. The Communist Party is an opposition. It's the largest opposition bloc. You don't see Vladimir Putin running around beating up communists, putting them in jail. Nope, the Communist Party's out there to say what they want. But see, the Communist Party is the Communist Party of Russia. They're Russians who are looking out to do the best thing for Russia. They may oppose Putin's policy, but they're not anti-Russian. That's the thing. Navalny was not a Russian patriot. He's a man who took CIA money to destroy Russia. So is Nemtsov. Pardon?
Where's your proof? Where's the proof that he is a CIA asset? I
Oh
can
gosh,
see
I
how
don't
he
know.
could
Where
be.
where do we start on this one? I mean, I just wrote an article. Let's say that when he became politically active in 2005 and he joined the Yabloko movement, when you have the head of the Yabloko movement meeting with the US Embassy saying, I need money from the National Endowment for Democracy, which is nothing more than a CIA front to do what the
No,
CIA
that's
used
true.
to do.
That's
Pardon?
true. Now, so this is documented that what year? When was this, you say?
2005.
Right. And so his movement or him himself said, I need the money. And yes, you're absolutely right about the National
I know
Endowment.
I'm right about the National Endowment of Democracy. I'm right about everything I say. I'm not in the business of saying things that aren't correct. So when I say that Navalny is a CIA asset, we can waste time to debate that if you want. I'm more than happy to provide the sources, but I'm telling you straight up, he is controlled by the CIA. Michael McFaul, do you know that name? Do you remember that name? Former ambassador, used to
Yeah,
be
yeah,
Obama's
yeah,
National Security Council Russia expert.
yeah.
McFaul recruited Navalny. Did you know that Navalny visited the White House in February of 2009?
I
Why
did
would
not.
Navalny visit the White House in February of 2009? Because he cares about Russia? Because he loves Russia? No, because he was coordinating with Michael McFaul to win a Yale fellowship, which he then came in August and spent 4 months in the United States working with the National Resources Division of the CIA to plot the release of documents, which he released while he was at Yale, released them in November of 2010, attacking a pipeline. The purpose of this attack, to destroy Russian confidence in Vladimir Putin, to say that Vladimir Putin is corrupt, to disrupt Vladimir Putin's potential return to power. Navalny was a CIA asset implanted in Russia to try and undermine Vladimir Putin's rule. Straight up simple fact. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows it.
Everyone knows it maybe in Russia, but they sure don't know it in this country.
Sure
I
they
mean,
do.
you
They
would
just
never,
ignore it. The facts are right there. You
Yeah.
can't, again, how can Americans sit there and say that, when Navalny's funding, because one of the things that happened in 2012 is the Russians shut down the conduit for funding through the non-governmental organizations, which were little more than USAID fronts and National Endowment for Democracy fronts. Look, when you have Navalny's deputy, the deputy, number 2 guy, meeting in Moscow in 2012 with British intelligence, it's on videotape, saying we need 10 to 12 million dollars if we're going to do this political opposition thing. Now, how patriotic of a Russian are you if you have to turn to British intelligence to get 10 to 12 million dollars to organize yourself politically? You're not very patriotic, are you? Navalny is scum personified. Russians despise this man. No real Russian loves this man. The Russians that do support him are the Russians that forgot what it meant to be Russian, who instead embraced this artificial notion of what the West should be or what the West could be, and they thought that that's what Russia should be. And they fled. They all left in 2022 in February. 200 to 300,000 of them ran across the border to Georgia, to Kazakhstan. But you know what's happening right now? Most of them want to come back because they sat there.
Go into more detail about why they left. Why did they leave?
Why did they leave? Because the Navalny organization said, leave. And they said, we're going to leave because we don't want to be drafted. We don't want to be mobilized into Putin's war against Ukraine. But the people that left could never be drafted. Why? Because the only people that were mobilized were the reservists, people who had served in the Russian military prior and were now being called back up. The guys who left, none of them served in the military. None of them were going to be called up. They're all a bunch of Navalny supporters, which means you're nobody, means you forgot what it means to be Russian, that you don't appreciate Russian culture, you don't appreciate Russian history, that you want Russia to subordinate itself to the West. And now we come back to your energy thing, and you're spot on this. When Navalny's number one attacks against Russia for corruption were energy interests. When Navalny's wife right now is the new Navalny. She's been anointed by the West as the new Navalny. Her boyfriend, now we don't like to use that term, but her lover, we don't like to use that term. The person that she's been associating with in a romantic fashion for the last 2 days said, I guess in a week leading up to to this, that the Navalny group, he and Mrs. Navalny, who's the anointed one, were talking about what has to happen. They said that as long as Navalny's in jail, as long as he's in prison, they're paralyzed. They can't do anything. But if there was an event that would happen in prison, then they could move forward. And they said, our first step is to break up the Russian energy monopolies. We will break them up and hand them out to the West. And we will need banks to do this. I'm not making this stuff up. It's right there. You can't tell me that that's a Russian patriot. No Russian patriot would ever say the first thing we need to do is break up Rosneft. No, that's the last thing you need to do, because Rosneft empowers Russia. It brings Russia income that allows the Russian government to build Russia up from where it was in 1999 to today. I heard you say you wouldn't want to live in Putin's Russia. Well, that's your business. Every Russian that lives there is proud to live in Putin's Russia, because they all know what Yeltsin Russia was. They know what it was in the 1990s when America did come in and steal an election. You know, we stole an election in 1996. We bought it. We admit it. Time magazine has it on their cover. We tried to do it again in 2000. We tried to do it again in 2008. We tried to do it in 2012. We've been trying ever since. It's documented. The Russians know this. That's just why when you say, the Russians believe in democracy. They want democracy, but not democracy defined by the CIA. They're not going to let the CIA come in and buy the opposition, which they did. Navalny was bought and paid for in 2005, and he's been on the CIA payroll ever since, until he got arrested, thrown in jail. End of story.
I'm speechless. I mean, let the energy aspect, because unfortunately that seems to be my causes. Like what's happening with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Sabotage. They ever going to be able to put that back together? Germany ever decide to make it operational? Like success in Germany not to make it operational. Was there any discussion with Russians?
Well, the thing you have to understand about Nord Stream, first of all, is that it was German infrastructure. It's not a Russian pipeline. It's a German pipeline. I mean, it's Russian gas, but it's a German pipeline owned by a German consortium.
Just a German consortium.
Well, the Russians have an interest in it, but what I'm trying to say is that, there were 4 pipelines. Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2 were the pipelines, but each one had 2 pipelines attached. My understanding is that 2 of the Nord Stream 1 pipelines were taken out. 1 of the Nord Stream 2 pipelines were taken out. 1 of the Nord Stream 2 pipelines is fully functional and could supply gas today. But Germany has decided that they're not going to let it turn on. So it's not a question of could Russia do this. Putin has said, we're ready to turn it on anytime you want. Anytime you want, we can turn it on. We're here.
Yeah. Well, meanwhile, and this is my analysis, because of the sabotage, and Ukraine backers been looking all over the place for alternative supplies, and I do find it interesting that President Biden had to go hat in hand Saudi Arabia and try to convince Mohammed bin Salman, the effective ruler, some over the price of oil, to help supply people. I'm sorry, help buy to Europe, and that brought gas. That my analysis that the end game gas is to turn Israel to energy border. At least that is what Netanyahu wanted. He wanted it before the Israeli invasion was in 2009, and again in 2014. The whole purpose of it was to prevent Hamas from having control of oil and natural gas up in both Palestine on it, gas, in 2000, and there's going to be $600 waiting to send that message. So if people just can't understand why we're continuing back to genocidal attacks, Palestinians. Why would we wait so long for saying, got to make sure that civilians, and I believe it's because of the United States understand that what it wants to do is going to exploit all that natural gas. It's going to prevent the Palestinians from getting it, and the developing pipeline is both under the Mediterranean, up and down the coast, and send that natural gas to provide the desperately additional supplies that the Europeans are all brink and they're not get. And this is all documented. So you think about that, about Netanyahu's endgame. Now this is something I've researched quite deep in the debate on it. It's, you know, we can't cover everything, but wait, let me just add one other thing. This isn't interesting that that Biden had to swallow his statement of Saudi Arabia in a Hawaii state, because Saudi Arabia is behind the assassination of Khashoggi, the Washington Post reporter, and you know that effort by Saudi Arabia to eliminate one of his critics was blown up into huge proportion. But in my mind, understandably, and now he's got back by the Pat Pan to work with some standards and both sides. Khashoggi's dead in the Saudi embassy and Saudi. Anyway, so it happens on both sides, and up to now, I've sort of taken the position plague on all your houses. There's so much struggle for natural gas right now. And I know that oil companies have been told for people who work in but that's going to be engaging or build whatever it takes. Back well, Patriotism. So I'll turn this thoughts back at Gaza, for instance.
Well, what I would say about Saudi Arabia, first of all, is that the day of America having leverage over Saudi oil production is over, finished. Biden crawled to Mohammed bin Salman, but he didn't get what he wanted. What the Saudis said is actually, because I think Biden went there in July, and the Saudis said, well, we're going to wait until August because we have a meeting with the OPEC plus group. The plus is Russia, of course. And then Saudi Arabia and Russia sat down and said, no, we're not only are we not going to, increase oil production, we're going to lower it more, which is the last thing that Biden wanted, which shows that America's irrelevant. Then China turned around and patched up relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran, eliminating one of the points of friction that the United States used to manipulate the oil market by creating uncertainty, etc. With good relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran, the prospects of war, which would then be used as a way of controlling the market, or at least keeping Iranian oil off of the market, is gone. And then Russia turned around together with China and got Saudi Arabia and Iran to join BRICS, which is the new economic forum that matters. It's not the G7.
Can you describe what BRICS stands for?
BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. It was this informal group of nations that were tired of being dictated to by the G7. But they really didn't have much traction. They were just sort of meeting, talking general policies until this war, until the United States started sanctioning Russia and telling the Chinese basically this is your future as well, sanctioning China. And I think the developing South woke up and recognized that they are hostages to American policy, to American Congress. Anything that touches the dollar is now subjected to sanctions. And they said, we're not going to play that game anymore. And so it became a serious organization. They sat down and said, how do we become an organization that can make global policy? And then they also recognized that in addition to building the institutions necessary to do this, institutions that mirror the institutions of the G7 to become a permanent bureaucracy of the global South, they needed to expand. And so last meeting in South Africa, they agreed to expand their membership. They voted for 6 new members. Argentina has stepped out, but they brought in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Ethiopia, and the 5th United Arab Emirates are now members
Wow,
of BRICS. And
that's amazing. So how has the United States responded? I sense it, I feel very hurt by that development.
well, the United States, like Europe, continues to play the propaganda game, saying, "Well, they're not really a real organization. They don't have that." But BRICS is meeting in Kazan in Russia in October. It's going to be one of the most significant meetings of this of this century because this is the meeting that's going to determine whether or not BRICS can become an adult organization capable of challenging the G7. And when BRICS challenges the G7, understand that's the end of the G7. The G7 will stop being the global player. BRICS will replace it. And we're taking a look at Russia, Saudi Arabia, Iran, China, United Arab Emirates. I just named some of the largest energy producers in the world. And when you bring them together, they dominate the global energy market. And they're now working together in a singular forum that excludes the United States and Europe. So guess who's going to be making international energy policy going forward? Not the United States. The United States just saw its control of the world market collapse. Along with that comes the collapse of the petrodollar, which is also linked to the de-dollarization being pursued by BRICS. Now, this isn't going to happen overnight, but this is the reality of global energy now. Global energy is no longer dictated by Washington, D.C. I work for an energy intelligence company, and every year there's a board meeting, and I watched every year these big dogs from American multinationals come in and all these Texan boys and all these guys with their big oil and their big boots and their big belts coming in say, bah, we can, don't worry about it. These geopolitical problems go away when you pour American money into it. Once oil companies get involved, the amount of money comes in and it dictates the solution. We don't have to worry about Iran being unhappy with us, Iraq being unhappy. Our money will make it happen. Not anymore. Not anymore. The world has decided that they're sick of American money. They're sick of the dollar. They're sick of the corruption that's attached to it. They're sick of the control that's attached to it. And BRICS is the revolution. BRICS is the new wave. And it's something that the world has to wake up to. So what I would advise, I love your pipeline theory, but what I would say is you have to go back and redo it and understand that all the pipelines that the United States was trying to use to control global energy no longer matter because Russia's gone on a new web has been built that doesn't matter. All those Ukrainian pipelines, they don't matter anymore. They're non-players. All the pipelines that ran through
Rusty
Poland.
too,
Pardon?
I said they're old and rusty.
It's
They
not
were
just
in
that, but
need
they
of
just don't
replacement.
they don't matter anymore because Russia's not in the business um, of thinking that supplying Europe with energy is important to them anymore. Because of the sanctions, it's no longer important to them. And they can control Europe indirectly. For instance, the way they're controlling it now is to sell oil to India. India's oil purchasing from Russia went up not by 20%, not by 200%, by 2,000%. And what India does then is then touch it with their refineries. I think under international law, if you import oil and you run it through your refinery, so you get a 10% modification of it, It's now your oil and you sell it. And so guess who's buying Russian energy today? The United States and Europe. But we buy it through India and we pay a premium. So instead of getting it cheaply from Russia, we're getting it with an extensive markup, 30, 40%. It's ridiculous. We're bankrupting ourselves. We're destroying the European economy. Russia, on the other hand, is just saying, how do I even begin to count this money? How do I count the money that I'm getting? And they're reinvesting it in Russia. This is why the Russian economy today is a sight to be seen, because they're not taking their money and dumping it in offshore banks and going to buy London real estate like they used to do. Now all that money is reinvested in Russia. So when you go to Novosibirsk, you see a skyline full of cranes. Why cranes? And these aren't cranes that are frozen in place by rust. These are cranes that are working as they build new infrastructure to meet the new demands of the growing Russian economy, which has not suffered even a hiccup because of Western sanctions. Russia is thriving today, thriving. It's not perfect. No society's perfect. Pardon?
I said you saw it person, because you were over there in May and then again.
I was there in May and then I saw it again. I was there in December and June or January.
I've got a couple of questions. All the stuff you're saying, Scott, did Tucker Carlson more or less say the same thing that you're saying right now as you speak to me in Charlotte?
Well, there's a difference. I mean, I look, Tucker did his job. Tucker's job was to present a third grade point of view of Russia to an American public that's incapable of understanding anything greater than the fourth grade point of view. All right. Tucker's presentation was shallow. It was superficial, but it was on. He was trying to make the point that Russia's thriving. He did it using the supermarket model, which is a model that most Americans will understand. Take a cart through the supermarket, fill it full of food, and see how much it costs. But he's missing the point. There's a lot to it. How did that food get there? Like in America, when you go to the supermarket, where's our food come from? Now we know that a lot of our food comes from California, where we use massive illegal, undocumented, immigrant populations to harvest this stuff. They're slave labor. Are we proud of this in America? Do we sit there and say, that's the American way? That's the American dream. It's reality. Every time we take this fresh head of lettuce in our thing, it's February right now. Good luck growing lettuce in your garden in upstate New York. You can't. I get it because somebody trucks it in from California where they grow it and it's harvested by a bunch of undocumented illegal immigrants coming in from Mexico. In Russia, Tucker Carlson didn't ask this question. This is why he's superficial. Where did that agriculture come from? It's not just the large state-sponsored farms. Russia underwent an agricultural revolution. Again, Vladimir Putin. It's something that most Americans don't understand. That's why I get a little upset when people say, I wouldn't want to live in Putin's Russia. Why not? What's wrong with Putin's Russia? You don't know a damn thing about Putin's Russia if you're saying that. Putin's Russia actually turned around and created opportunities for the small farmers. And the small farmers have turned around and are the cornerstone of this kind of agricultural growth that allows every damn supermarket in Russia to be filled with fresh produce that isn't harvested by illegal, undocumented slave labor in America. It's harvested by people who are making money from this. It's sort of like the capitalist dream for Russia. The people went out and actually planted crops. They put it together. They collectivize it. They ship it off. It's clean. It doesn't have GMOs. That's the other thing about our wonderful American food. It's just packed full of crap that's going to kill you. The Russian food, on the other hand, is sort of healthy because they ban GMOs. It's healthy food. Is Russia perfect? No, not at all. Not even close. But it's pretty damn good. And Tucker Carlson didn't make that point, you see, because it's not just about having a cart full of food of the same quality, better quality than you get in America that costs 1/3 as much. All those people out there, again, let's focus on the 1/3 thing. America's got a gross national product of this. We are the greatest economy in the world. Russia's small, insignificant, but triple the Russian GDP because it comes down to what's called PPP, which is, I'm trying to come up with the term, but it's about parity. It's what the purchasing power of your income is. And if the Russians can take $1 and make it buy 3 times as much or 4 times as much as what you get for $1 in America, is it really right to talk about gross national product in strict dollar terms? No, it's not. The Russian economy is actually much healthier, much more vibrant than simple statistics would show. But again, it's not just about the purchasing power. It's about what's behind the agriculture. People got mad at Tucker when he talked about, the homeless carts. They said, oh, you can't, John Stewart, oh, the price of freedom. What's the price of freedom, John? The price of freedom is to have homeless. The price of freedom is to pay more at the pump. John Stewart doesn't know what freedom is in Russia because he's never been to Russia. John Stewart hasn't gone to Russia. All those people who say Russia's not free, go to Russia, then come back and say it. You'll change your tune completely. Russia is not what people make it out to be. It is not a dictatorship. It is not a police state. And their crops are not harvested by undocumented slave labor. The quality of the Russian society is from top to bottom better than the quality of American society. We hide behind fake stuff. We hide, for instance, our supermarkets, but our supermarkets hide a lot of sins. They hide a lot of sins, like the slave labor we use to harvest our crops, like the GMOs that are used by Monsanto and others to create the food that turns into the poison that we eat, like the shopping carts that end up on the side of the street serving as the homes of the homeless. Yeah, our supermarkets hide a lot of sins. The fact that the Russian supermarkets don't hide those sins is because those sins don't exist.
One of the things that Charlotte contacted me about was she wanted your take on Navalny. Okay. So we talked about Navalny and we've talked about energy. How does Navalny's death relate to the energy situation that we're seeing in the world?
It doesn't. Navalny's a nothing. Understand this. A nobody died in Russia. Nobody in Russia cares. A handful of people are, oh my God, Navalny's dead. Majority of Russians are like, we don't care. Navalny doesn't here in the United States, we're trying to turn him into something, create him into a movement because he is a CIA asset. How many people know this? All right, ready? I'm going to throw us a couple questions out here to people. How many people know that Navalny reached out to one of his CIA controllers? Now, the CIA operates in funny ways. They don't actually just come up and straight recruit you. It's a recruitment of influence. For instance, the CIA, through the National Endowment of Democracy, funded a school called the New Economic School in Russia. And the chairman of that was a guy named Sergei Guriev. And Sergei Guriev, he's an academic, well-known. He came into prominence in 2009 when Barack Obama went there to Russia and gave the commencement address at the New Economic School, an important address considered to be the third most important address in Obama's history. But no American knows it because we don't care about Russia. We don't focus on Russia. We're ignorant about Russia. Third most important address. It was about bringing democracy to Russia, about doing these things that the CIA wanted, but now they're going to disguise it as the reset. But Guriev's the guy that helped bring Navalny to America through the Yale. He sponsored him. Why? Because the CIA told him to, because McFaul told him to, because they needed Navalny. Do people know that he was a racist guy who made ugly videos about shooting Chechens? He called Georgians rodents, and that normally America wouldn't give a visa to people like that. We don't give visa to Nazis. We don't give visas who parade around and say other things, but he got invited to Yale. Why? Because they made it disappear. Guriev, McFaul, and the others made it disappear. But Guriev was in communication with Navalny right up until the point he died.
What was the it?
Pardon?
What was the it? He said they made it disappear. What are you referring to?
His racist background. The fact that he was leading Nazi marches through downtown Moscow.
Oh.
Yeah,
well,
I know. We don't like to talk about that. The guy is a racist pig. So,
but never talking about it.
No one ever talks about that. We made it disappear. It goes away. Now, today you can find it. But my point is, Guriev was in connection with him. He said that Navalny communicated to him directly that he made a mistake in going back to Russia and that he would certainly hope that he could get released. And if he got released, he would disappear. He would come back. He would never play with Russia again. He was done, finished. This was like literally 2 weeks before he died that he said this. At the same time, Bild, a German newspaper, said that the CIA was in negotiations with Russian intelligence about the release of Navalny, that the CIA was working with Russian intelligence to get Navalny exchanged for, and you heard Vladimir Putin talk about this. He said, our special services are in contact. And he said, it's a complicated thing. But there's a guy that we have in Germany who, he's a patriot, he called him. He didn't want to say he was a GRU assassin. He said he's a patriotic Russian who killed a man whose crime was to murder Russian prisoners of war. He ran over their heads with a truck. Nice guy. That's the kind of guy that nations want to kill. And so Russia sent a guy. They don't admit it. They say he was a patriotic guy, but he was their guy. There's no doubt about it. He went in, popped the guy, because that's what happens when you run a truck over Russian prisoners of war. It's amazing how patriotic Russians are. They don't like it when people murder their prisoners of war. Hint, hint to all Ukrainians out there who have ever videotaped yourself murdering Russian prisoners. You're not going to live long because the Russians will hunt you down and they will kill you. But the Germans got this guy. He's in prison. Russia wants him back because he's a patriot. But the Germans are saying, we'll never release this guy at all, ever, ever, ever. And so the Russians were saying, well, how about Navalny? And the Germans are like, nope, not enough. Then the Russians said, well, what about Evan Gershowitz? Remember the guy that Tucker Carlson talked about, the Wall Street Journal guy, who's a spy, by the way. He's not a journalist. He's a straight up CIA asset. Want to know how you know? I'll tell you how you know. The CIA is negotiating for him. The CIA doesn't negotiate for non-spies. The CIA never gets involved with non-spies. That's a State Department thing. The CIA only gets involved with spies. So they're now talking about Evan and Navalny. Why are they talking about Navalny? Why would the CIA talk about Navalny? Because he's a spy. He's a CIA asset. So they're sitting there saying, we have two assets that we have of yours, Evan and Navalny, and we want our guy back. And the CIA is going to the Germans saying, we think this is a good deal. We need to make this thing happen. All right. That's how you know that Navalny's a CIA spy. But here's the thing. So now they're talking about releasing him. What happens when they make this great release? And it was talking about happening this year, by the way. I think Evan's parents are very upset because he could have been released, but Navalny died. Well, first of all, why would the Russians negotiate for his release and then kill him? Get rid of the one thing that gives them leverage to get the guy they really want. Russia didn't kill Navalny. Now, did he die of natural causes? Maybe, but he wasn't killed by Russia. But what I do know is this: had he been released, we wouldn't be having this discussion about Navalny's CIA connections, because it would have been obvious to all that he was released as part of a spy exchange. And so now he's destroyed. The brand name of Navalny's gone. You know, that Oscar-winning documentary they made, Navalny, everybody talks about Navalny, 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 but suddenly it's spy. And that changes everything, because he's not a Democratic representative. He's not a man of the people. He's a scum spy who sold his soul to the CIA to undermine his country, Russia. That's the reality of Navalny. And had he been exchanged, that would have been the reality. And when he got exchanged, he said, I'm not going to play the Navalny game anymore. So the millions of dollars that the CIA invested in creating the brand of Navalny is gone, but not now. He's dead. You ask the question, who benefits? Cui bono? Well, it ain't Russia that benefits from this. They don't care about Navalny. Oh, they spit on him. He's a nobody. Putin won't even mention his name. That's how insignificant this scum is. He sold his country out to the CIA. He's just a nobody. But in the West, we invested everything in Navalny, everything. What do we have today? The name's still alive through his wife. She has inherited the brand. She was anointed at the Munich Security Conference, ready there, all dolled up, smiling to the camera. Now, she couldn't hide the smile, but you saw it. Everybody saw the smile where she turned around and she smiled. Your husband just died and you're smiling? That ain't mourning. You know, she's supposed to be a Russian. I'll tell you this, no Russian. If I die, I can tell you my wife will not go before a camera until 40 days is up. 40 days of mourning. 40 days of mourning. She won't even speak for 4 days. Then they have to have a church ceremony. After the church ceremony, she could get on to the business of mourning. And after 40 days, she could get on with her life. Navalnaya, Yulia, or Yolanda, as Biden likes to call her, is smiling before the cameras less than a day after her husband's dead. And she's meeting with people, hugging people, anointing herself the new Navalny. What a scum she is. What a horrible woman she is. She's not a Russian, and every Russian knows this because a Russian would never allow that to happen. 40 days, 40 days of mourning. That's how you'd say there's time to take care of the rebranding later. You mourn your husband. You mourn your loss. She didn't. She was just right out there. Why? CIA asset. She ain't Russian. She ain't a real Russian. A real Russian knows how a real Russian would behave. She's not one of them. She's one of them. American, CIA controlled.
First of all, you're the first person I've heard this analysis.
Say again?
You are the first person that I've heard this analysis. And I want to know, what's the Russian press saying? I mean, who else is putting out counter analysis?
The Russian press doesn't care. They don't care. No, I'm trying to impress on you that Navalny is the biggest nothing in Russia imaginable. They don't care about him. Why would the Russian press be wasting any space on this loser of a human being? This man who sold out his country. They don't care.
It's now got God status.
What?
I'm saying he now has the status of like a god. I mean,
he's not a god, not in Russia. They don't care. And they don't care about America either. They don't care what we think. Do you think the Russians are losing sleep because you and I and Cynthia are having this conversation about Navalny? Do you think they're losing sleep by anything that's happening about it? They don't care. We don't matter. We are non-entities to them because we opted out. We're the ones that sanctioned them. We're the ones that are strangling them. We're the ones that are trying to destroy them. We're the ones that are seeking the strategic destruction of Russia. We're the ones that are sending billions of dollars to Ukrainians to kill Russian soldiers. You really think the Russian people are going to go, oh my God, I'm really worried that Cynthia, Charlotte, and Scott are having a conversation about Navalny. They don't care. They really don't care at all. Not a single one of them.
What about the actual war is taking a terrible toll?
They're winning. They're winning.
Well, at this point, they appear to be.
No, it does not appear to be. At this point, they're winning. It's not appear to be. They've slaughtered 400,000 Ukrainian soldiers. They've suffered maybe 80, 90,000 dead of their own. That's a lot. This is a nation, the Russians identify with the Soviet Union. 27 million they lost fighting Nazi Germany. 27 million. Again, visit Russia and you'll understand the depth of the patriotism. Right now, Ukraine's running around thumping guys on the head to get a few thousand mobilized to the front, train them for 8 days, send them to the front, and they die within 4 days. They have to replace them. Russia, every day, 1,500 volunteers for the Russian military. 53,000 last week volunteered since January 1st. Volunteers, not mobilized, not conscripted. Volunteers, you know what the average age is? 35. What does that tell you? It's a 35-year-old man who's married with a family and a job. The last thing he needs to be doing is leaving all that, going to war. But why is he doing it? Not because he's making money, he's losing money. He's doing it because he loves his country and he recognizes that from the Russian perspective, this war is an existential struggle for their survival against the collective West. Russia's the most patriotic nation you can possibly imagine. And here in the West, we're saying stupid things like, well, they appear to be, they're winning, man. They're winning in their hearts, they're winning in their minds, and they're winning on the battlefield, and they will never lose. But America doesn't get it. Somehow we don't respect the Russians. When we talk about Victory Day, May 9th, we say, well, that's a propaganda exercise put on by Vladimir Putin just to appease the political elite. But in Russia proper, they don't care. Well, I was in Russia proper during the week leading up to May 9th. Every single one of them cares. They weep tears in memory of the sacrifice they made. Every village, every town in Russia has a memorial to the 27 million dead. They look up at the stars and they tell me, every single one of them, that my relatives are looking down at me, holding me accountable for not doing anything that shames the sacrifice they made. And they view what's happening in Ukraine as a shame because it is the resurrection of the ideology that their relatives died to destroy back in 1945. But today it's alive because of America. We've breathed life into this Banderist ideology. We helped empower it continuously by the CIA. I keep bringing them up because they never go away. The CIA supporting the Banderas, the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, starting to parachute. Everybody knows that the CIA went to the displacement camps in Germany, grabbed the Ukrainians, trained who were loyal to Stepan Bandera, trained them, equipped them, and parachuted them back into Ukraine. Did you know that? To send them in there so they could hook up with the guerrillas and continue a guerrilla warfare for the sole purpose of destroying the Soviet Union. Now, the Soviets defeated this guerrilla movement in 1953. 200,000 of them were sent to a concentration camp, the Gulag. Oh, wait, only innocent people went to the Gulag. Nope, 200,000 Nazis went to the Gulag, but they were freed by Khrushchev in his anti-Stalinist purge, came back to Ukraine, where the CIA once again stepped in and continuously funded them up until 1990. Understand that we funded Nazis in Ukraine from 1954 to 1990. In 1990, they stepped away and let that National Endowment for Democracy come in and continue to function. They supported them. The National Endowment of Democracy helped create the Color Revolution of 2004, purely a CIA construct, regime change operation to ensure that the constitutionally elected government of Viktor Yanukovych, a Russian-leaning Ukrainian politician, couldn't come in. They got rid of him. But you know what happens? 4 years later, Yanukovych won an election. And the CIA went, well, we can't have him in. So they did a coup, 2014. But this time the coup wasn't just to get rid of Yanukovych, it was to get rid of the Russians. They empowered the nationalists and said, go kill the Russians. And they did. They went to Odessa and they burned them to death. Then they tried to go to Crimea, but the Russians in Crimea said, ain't going to happen on our watch. And they rose up, kicked them out, and went independent. Russia recognized. They went to Mariupol. They drove tanks over the Russian population there. They raped that population, and they started a conflict between Russians who said, we will not allow ourselves to be genocided in this fashion. They rose up, and then it led to this conflict. But it's the CIA. Now, what did the CIA do after 2014? Well, the New York Times now is helping us out. It turns out that in 2015, the CIA built 12 bases along the Ukrainian-Russian border. And the purpose of those bases was to empower the Ukrainians to attack Russia, to collect intelligence inside Russia. This is at a time, I want to remind you, where we had a reset, where we're supposed to be being friends with Russia. But no, our true goals and objective is to undermine Russia, to use Ukraine as a launching pad for a NATO conflict into Russia. That's what the CIA does for a living. So now I come back to Alexei Navalny, a CIA asset. And imagine what a Russian thinks about when they think about Alexei Navalny, because it's not about the CIA trying to promote democracy. It's never been about the CIA promoting democracy. It's about the CIA trying to destroy Russia. And the New York Times has just said that the CIA built 12 bases on the Ukrainian border with Russia for the purpose of destroying Russia. Navalny is attached to that. You can't unattach him. He's scum. If he was an American, I'd be arguing for the death penalty because he betrayed his country. It's the same way I feel about Aldrich Ames. It's the same way I feel about Hansen. It's the same way I feel about anybody who betrayed the trust their country gave them. He betrayed Russia. Alexei Navalny took CIA money for the purpose of destroying Russia. He admits it. He wrote it down. He's talking about regime change. He says, my goal, my objective is to bring down the Putin government. And he's being paid by the CIA to do that. That's not a Russian patriot. That's a CIA goon.
I have another interview in 6 minutes, so I'd like to hear your final thoughts, Charlotte.
Into this interview with an open mind. I'm certainly going to check out Scott's about being an agent. I can see that as entirely possible. We're making it out to be a somebody, huge somebody, and I don't know how long that's going to last. Because you have such a different perspective on Scott. And I would love to get into, like, how did you get, but you don't have time, maybe another time. How did you get so passionately involved in Russia? I mean, they may say that you're being spiteful. I mean, they might say that, right? This is a great game. This is how I did that. It's the great game. And they're going to, both sides are going to get involved in their stomping. So, I mean, come on, devil's advocate.
Well,
Scott?
what I'll say is this: on February 22nd, that's just last Thursday, I was at the Russian embassy. Oh my God, Scott was at the Russian embassy at the invitation of the Russian ambassador and the defense attaché. It was Defenders of the Fatherland Day. And I brought with me a bottle of high-end bourbon and I gave it to the boys. I call the boys, those are the Russian soldiers. They're the boys for me because they're in the military. I have a lot of respect for the military and what they do. And we, God forbid, we filled up glasses and we had a toast. And a lot of people attacked me for that. And so I showed them the video I took last year when I went to Defender of the Fatherland celebration at the Russian embassy, where we drank vodka again with the Russian. My God, Scott, you're a Russian agent. Then I remind people that from 1988 to 1990, while I served as a commissioned officer in the United States Marine Corps assigned to Vodkinsk, where we were doing arms control, that I gave similar toasts with my Russian counterparts at that time. It was the most damn patriotic thing I've ever done because I was motivated not to engage in conflict with these people. I was trying to prevent a nuclear war. Now, if I can have a toast with the Soviets, with the Russians in 1988 to 1990 to stop a nuclear war, why the hell can't I do it today? Isn't stopping a nuclear war a priority of people? So for all the people who will say things, well, you've gone over the Russians. First of all, they don't know anything about me. They don't know anything about my background. They don't know what motivates me. If they listened to me, they would. But there's nothing wrong with doing what I'm doing because it's about doing it for the cause of peace. It's about doing it to stop a nuclear war between the two largest nuclear powers in the world today. And that's how I would respond to it.
Well, I've got an interview in just another interview in just a couple of minutes. And I want to thank you, Charlotte. I want to thank you, Scott. This has been a very lively conversation. And I'm sure that as the year goes on, we'll probably have some more lively conversations. So you've been listening to Issues That Matter with my friends Charlotte Dennett and Scott Ritter. Thank you everybody for listening. And if you like this show, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you.
Thank you. Good talking to you, Charlotte.
Yeah, very interesting, Scott.
Okay. Bye-bye.
I want to know more. I want to know about your film.